would you describe what poetry is?
I think poetry is intentional, lyrical writing.
Okay. Do you think poetry is only written, or can it be expressed in other ways?
Most poetry, I think, actually needs to be spoken to be understood. I think that poetry is a lot about the pauses in it, which comes from punctuation in poetry. So it's not just written. But I don't know if poetry can be painted or if it can be drawn. But so I guess it is written, but it must be spoken.
Okay. Do you have a favorite poem or poet?
It's an author. My favorite author is Aldous Huxley. But he writes very poetically. Most of his books are in verse, and I think this goes really well with what you guys are doing. But one of my favorite quotes of his is, "Lovely words and making an excuse to repeat them."
Okay. And on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you think you know poetry?
Wow, that's a tough one, really. I think I understand poetry when I speak it. So I would say when I have the chance to speak poetry, I understand it at about an 8. But sometimes if I just read it on the page, I maybe like a 4.
Okay. And would you like to read your poem?
Sure. All right. With reckless abandon, I tossed a burning match into the depths of your forest. That haven may never be the same, I realize. But with spring comes fresh trees through the smoldering soil. And here's to desperately hoping a phoenix can rise from these ashes.
Go. How would you describe what poetry is?
I would describe poetry as an outward expression of either your feelings of the world or your interpretations of the things around you.
Okay. Do you think poetry is only written, or can it be expressed in other ways?
It can be expressed in, art and movement. I mean, Hawaiian hula dance, the whole purpose of that is to tell a story and it's poetry by, so it can be expressed in any artistic way.
Okay. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you think you know poetry?
Probably a 4.
Okay. Do you have a favorite poem or a poet?
My favorite poem is the Desiderata. There's a lot of legend behind it and where it comes from, but it was copyrighted by Max.
Okay, nice.
So have you ever read it? It's really good.
Would you like to read your poem?
I wrote a haiku about being a mom. Her hair's growing in, crazy house, no peace in sight, worth every moment.
Okay, that's good.
How would you describe what poetry is?
Well, I think poetry can be described in a few different ways. One is, I just wrote a poem, and it kind of made me feel about things that I might not usually say. So it kind of brings in a different part of a person, and actually, the more sensitive part of a person. Poetry's cool.
Do you think poetry is only written, or can it be expressed in other ways?
Definitely in other ways also. I love the written form of it when it flows nicely and doesn't make me have to think too much, because some of it can be abstract. But after watching Layden Ricketts on the basketball court, I'd have to say that's poetry also.
How much do you think you know about poetry on a scale of 1 to 10?
Probably a 2, other than I do like to write poetry a little bit myself.
Do you have a favorite poem or poet?
I don't. I like a lot of different readings in that, so I won't say I don't like poetry. I like poetry, but to say if I have a favorite, I can't even pull a name out right now.
Okay. Would you read your poem to us?
Oh, yes. So I had about 2 minutes to write this poem, and I called it, It Was 88. And this is a life-changing poem. It was 88. It was a job interview in 1988. The lady who showed me the room, she was great. Yellowstone Park was on fire. The lady who showed me the room, I had a desire. The interview was at Park High. The lady who showed me the room is now the apple of my eye. I met my wife that day of the interview in 1988. Pam and I now have a reprobate, Sterling.
Good.
And go. How would you describe what poetry is?
Poetry is feeling, and you are, I think it's just like the best way to express like who you are through anything that I've experienced.
Do you think poetry is only written, or can it be expressed in other ways?
It can be sang, I believe, and it can be, poetry can be art, so that's what I think.
How much do you think you know about poetry on a scale of 1 to 10?
Well, thanks to Miss Powalish, probably like a 6.5.
Do you have a favorite poem or poet?
I think my favorite poem is There Will Be Rest by Sarah Teasdale.
Okay, and would you read your poem to us?
Gross, okay. She made it to the hospital finally. In fact, so had I. He paced around the room nervously. I would have if I could walk. Later they left the hospital with me asleep in the car.
How would you describe what poetry is?
Poetry is an expression of oneself in a non-sentence or structured format.
Do you think poetry is only written, or can it be expressed in other ways?
I'm pretty objective. Poetry is a written expression.
How much do you think you know about poetry on a scale of 1 to 10?
3.
Do you have a favorite poem or poet?
I don't know if I have a favorite poem, but I like Robert Service, who wrote poems. Have you ever read that?
No.
He wrote poems about the gold rush in Alaska, and he's excellent at rhyming poems. Ready
Would
for
you
my
read
point?
yours? Yep.
Pace and pressure, recovery and rest. Life is a marathon. I want to be my best.
Aw,